Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and thank you for stopping by. And I wish you safety for yourself, your families and your loved ones in these very difficult and extraordinary times we find ourselves in. Let me start with some macro thoughts. This is from Wilhelm Middelkoop. In Goethe's 1831 drama Faust, and I think it speaks for itself. Scott Burke interpreted it slightly differently, the print shop, and as I said on 24th of February 2020, the viral moment has arrived, which indeed it has, as we all know. And at that point I said I would venture gold is correlated to the coronavirus, which is set to turn parabolic and is already non-linear and exponential. Of course, we had quite a dramatic sell-off in the days immediately after that. We're currently now at 1651. And I know some folks think we're headed lower again. I beg to differ. I think we're in a consolidation phase before a big jumpstart higher. As I reiterated on the 22nd of March, I still believe gold will soon turn viral to the upside. And I look for a minimum of $2,000, if not more. Home thoughts last night. I was out on my veranda and I took a photo of the moon at around 7 p.m. with no filter and no flash. And this was it. And it really was quite beautiful. Amboseli, this photograph of Kilimanjaro by Rodrigo Nunes via Kenya Pics. I visited the Amboseli a few years ago. And I took this photograph of an ostrich, and in the background you see the elephants. This photograph there is a lake there, which I can't remember the story around it, but it's a very ancient lake, and we got there at about 6 in the evening. And it felt very mysterious and otherworldly. And finally, from the Amboseli, elephants in the Amboseli, just look at the back of the elephant at the rear. She passed, I think it was a she, just in front of us, and she was truly a remarkable elephant. I came across this from Muhammad Muzammik, Firman of Emperor Akbar Shah II, dated 1837 AD. Persian manuscript on paper, black nastaliq in clouds, seal impression in the upper right, surrounded by gold and polychrome illumination beneath a chhatri. Looks beautiful, doesn't it? Political reflections, the numbers I saw just before I went to the podcast were 1,430,141 total confirmed cases. Total deaths, 82,119. Total recovered, 301,130. Remy says we will cross the 1.5 million cases mark in the next 2 days, and we'll cross that today. As I said earlier in February, viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics, and that's precisely what we're seeing in these charts that people are talking about flattening. But I think they're getting way ahead of themselves. Malcolm Gladwell called this moment the tipping point, a moment in an epidemic when a virus reaches critical mass. It's the boiling point. Remy, again, we should reach the very grim milestone of 100,000 deaths related to the virus by Friday. John Donne, each man's death diminishes me, for I am involved in mankind. Therefore, send not to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. And as I said severally, COVID-19 is a karmic level stealth assassin, and you challenge it at your peril. A vast cathedral in central New York has been converted into a field hospital during the coronavirus pandemic. The zeitgeist of a time is its defining spirit or its mood, and the zeitgeist of 2020 is simply indescribable. I came across a tweet from Snig0y. What do you imagine the post-COVID-19 world to be like? And I was trying to kind of imagine that in my last article, the way we live now. It certainly is a new 21st century that we find ourselves in. There is a luminous and fairy tale feel to life in quarantine, and as you know, most fairy tales have an oftentimes dark and dangerous and unspoken undercurrent. I sit in my study and it's as if my hearing is sharpened. I hear the breeze, the birdsong, nature in its many forms. And the urban background noise, which was once the constant accompaniment to daily life, has entirely retreated. The nights are dark, the stars are bright, and the neighbours long gone. I then referenced a passage in V.S. Naipaul's A Bend in the River. You felt the land taking you back to what was there 100 years ago, to what had always been there. And I was referencing Don DeLillo, everything is barely weeks, everything is days, we have minutes to live. And I concluded by looking at the markets, and what I said is, what I do know is this: regime implosion is coming to the oil producers, and Trump can game the price a little more, sure, but it's a pointless exercise. Demand has cratered, and a return to a hyper-connected 100 million barrels per day world is not going to happen for the foreseeable future. Putin will survive because he prepared for this moment. Others are as good as terminated. I also know we're about to enter the Great Depression. The Fed, the ECB, and all the other central banks can print, but at some point it turns Weimar Germany. Before it turns Weimar Germany, it falls off a cliff in emerging markets. We're watching the great decoupling unfold in front of our eyes, from Brazil to South Africa to India. 20 years of good times are now ended. Africa is simply too dreadful to contemplate. We are weeks away now from collapsing healthcare systems and blow-ups in urban centres. Ramaphosa and Kagame might have a chance, but everywhere else I look, leadership is as clueless as Trump is in his White House briefing. You know that article by Arundhati Roy, The Pandemic is a Portal, in the FT. Unlike the flow of capital, this virus seeks proliferation, not profit, and has therefore inadvertently, to some extent, reversed the direction of the flow. And then, if it were not masks and gloves that its frontline soldiers needed, but guns, smart bombs, bunker busters, submarines, fighter jets, and nuclear bombs, Would there be a shortage? Wilhelm again, thanks to anonymous follower, reset, and I am sure we are going to reset, and in many ways I think the markets just simply haven't comprehended that appropriately. Ships operator Aurora Expeditions said that of 132 passengers and 85 crew, 128 people had tested positive for COVID-19. I saw there was a capital raising exercise by Carnival Cruises. That must be the biggest short of all time, because I can't imagine the cruise industry reverting to a normal anytime in the foreseeable future, because viruses exhibit nonlinear and exponential characteristics, and cruise ships are veritable petri dishes. Wuhan buckled up for restart at a shopping mall in Wuhan. Shops like Louis Vuitton and Prada are looking forward to receiving more customers, Global Times News. Merchants are busy preparing goods and sterilizing as Wuhan stands ready to lift its lockdown on Wednesday. And that took me back to this comment. Perhaps too the besieged city of Wuhan, beset as it is by crisis, may also prove to be a Jerusalem, a place of hope and peace, an old city proffering new hope. Refinitiv clients in China who want to read a Reuters story on Trump criticizing the World Health Organization as being too China-centric, which it was, but that doesn't allow him to get away with his failures, will see this message or some version of this, Rover 829. In China, if you've been censored, you've been harmonized. Hexy over the eyes means harmony. In China, if you've been censored, you've been harmonized. Chinese ejecting Africans from homes, hotels over claims of importing coronavirus into the country, Sahara reporters. They said there are claims that blacks are the ones now importing coronavirus into China. Foreigners, and particularly black people, are currently not allowed to access public places, including malls, restaurants, and hospitals. They have landlords to evict them. They chase them out of hotels and make them go through all sorts because of coronavirus. I would like to keep you informed that for the good of public health, anyone, including Chinese nationals with overseas travel records, will be required to undergo an epidemic investigation and PCR testing. This was a letter to the Ghanaian government. In a notice to foreigners in the affected province, the Chinese government said from April 5 to April 7, according to relevant government departments, the streets will organize African tenants within their jurisdictions to carry out nucleic acid screening at designated sites. Owners, residents are requested to know and inform their families. There has been a very racist reaction in China, largely manufactured by the government, but nevertheless worth keeping an eye on, because the blowback effects will be quite severe, particularly in Africa. International markets, hopefully this pandemic forces a proper rethink of the trillions in defense spending. Governments, let's face it, were utterly ill-prepared to protect their citizens from this virus. What would one give for an F-16 worth of ventilators right now? And as Balaji said, the virus may be the most dangerous adversary America has ever faced. It's like the US was invaded. The normal defenses fail, it can't be bombed, bank accounts can't be frozen, unbreakable morale, no supply chain, lives off the land, infinite reinforcements, fully decentralized. I wrote before, a non-linear and exponential virus represents the greatest risk to a control machine, in point of fact. As we've said before, the virus is not correlated to endogenous market dynamics, but is an exogenous uncertainty that remains unresolved. And this bounce from the markets is totally nonsensical. The Credit Suisse S&P 500 was up 22.4% from March 23 lows, pushing stock multiples to 19 times forward earnings based on fresh estimates. That is the same level it held on February 19, the all-time high. 24th of February, I said a rate cut or even four will produce a dead cat bounce and then a dynamic move to the downside. That dynamic move to the downside might be upon us. Currency markets, euro is at 108.48, dollar index 100.376, Japanese yen 108.82, Swiss franc 0.9733, the pound 122.99, Australian dollar 0.6130, India rupee 75.9075, South Korean won 1121.90. Brazilian real 522.30, Egyptian pound 15.7866. That's probably been the best behaved emerging market currency this year. South African rand 18.3711, big bounce from above 19, but it will come apart. Dollar index, as I said, bit firmer today, 100.376, euro dollar 108.46. Commodity markets, this is a chart from Wilhelm of crude oil. He's expecting a higher low. I don't. As I said on the 6th of April, demand has cratered and a return to a hyper-connected 100 million barrels per day world is not going to happen for the foreseeable future. What I do know is this regime implosion is coming to the oil producers and Trump can game the price a little more. Sure, but it's a pointless exercise. Demand has cratered. Putin will survive because he's prepared for this moment. Others are as good as terminated. And I also know we're about to enter the Great Depression. The jet fuel market seems to be heading to a very long-term demand problem if you believe Lufthansa. In turn, that raises questions about the forecast for a second-half oil demand recovery. It's not going to happen. And I tweeted yesterday, a mill here, a mill there, another mill there. What difference does it make when you're at like 25 million barrels per day down? As I said on the 22nd of March about COVID-19 and a hard stop, we are moving from a world of hyper-connectedness to a world of quarantine. A complete quarantine is the only way to vaccine this 21st century world of ours. Bill Gates' coronavirus has started behaving a lot like the once-in-a-century pathogen we've been worried about. The price of crude oil is perfectly correlated to the COVID-19 sudden stop. Kapuściński oil creates the illusion of a completely changed life, life without work, life for free. Oil is a resource that anesthetizes thought, blurs vision, corrupts. Kindles extraordinary emotions and hopes, since oil is above all a great temptation. It is a temptation of ease, wealth, strength, fortune, power. It is a filthy, foul-smelling liquid that squirts obligingly up into the air and falls back to earth as a rustling shower of money. No more. Hunter S. Thompson, there is no honest way to explain the edge, because the only people who really know where it is are the ones who have gone over. These oil producers are at the edge. Tweet from Javier Blas a few days ago, Trafigura co-head of oil trading says consumption may be down 35 million barrels per day now. Everyone focused on Saudi, Russia, Trump. We have no hope of production cuts matching the demand destruction, and that's the main point. And now Trump has shot his shot. This is not a Dow Jones tariff war algo gig. Emerging market currencies offer the best buying opportunity in more than 2 decades, according to Charlie Robertson. He particularly likes the South African rand, the Mexican peso, and the Brazilian real. His bull case is based on historically cheap valuations, funding support from multilateral lenders, and the prospect of a weaker US dollar. He said crude oil prices could rebound to $45 to $50 per barrel medium term. It's the best time to buy emerging markets in over 20 years. This is the cheapest opportunity since the last time everyone hated EM after the Asian crisis and the Russian default. MSCI's developing nation currency gauge hit a 3-year low last month, and Robertson's top picks, South Africa, Mexico, and Brazil, are testing their weakest levels ever. These are remarkable valuation levels, he said. As I said on the 6th of April, I think it all continues to fall off a cliff in emerging markets, and we're watching the great decoupling unfold in front of our eyes, from Brazil to South Africa to India. While the pace of outflows from EM has greatly reduced in the past few days, the extent and the scale of the COVID-19 shock is unprecedented. Econ chart. The level and speed of outflows in around 90 days of 2020 is equivalent to the worst yearly figures on record. Borrowing in local currency has not made emerging markets immune to COVID-19's financial shock, as spreads and FX rates move in tandem. Portfolio investors face amplified losses. And I call that the China EM frontier feedback loop phenomenon, you will recall. I said the rand is the purest proxy for this phenomenon. African countries heavily dependent on China, being the main taker, are also at the bleeding edge of this phenomenon. The pressure point will not ease soon, but will continue to intensify. President Magufuli, COVID-19 is the equivalent of Satan, and it would be naturally defeated with prayer, since Satan cannot reside in the body of Christ, he said. This is an article by Fatma Karume in Vanguard Africa. As officials in the rest of the world, including our immediate neighbors, were advocating social distancing, our dear leader was encouraging mass congregation in churches and mosques as an antidote to the coronavirus. Whilst the leaders of Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda had been locked in video conference discussions to determine strategy and next steps, our president excused himself entirely. In the midst of confusion and fear, we started tweeting, retweeting, and forwarding a video clip by a local comedian, Masanja, in which he takes to the streets of our capital and asks passengers and passers-by whether they fancy a little COVID-19. Masanja was thereafter ordered to report to the nearest police station by the district commissioner and forced to apologize for failing to take appropriate actions to educate the people. As the rest of the world remains in some form of precautionary lockdown in line with best public health practices, we in Tanzania have been told to continue attending places of prayer, as prayer is our only salvation, not to dare joke about the matter, and to leave our homes, go to work, and stop being lazy. Tijian Tiam, Gozi Okonjo, and others call for a 2-year moratorium on Eurobond payments by African sovereigns to free up funds to fight the pandemic. That would be a default. The rest is PR, Joseph Cottrell. And he's right. I wrote about this and debt, virus, and locusts creating a perfect storm for Africa. A lot of this debt is largely useless and has never produced an ROI, maybe never will. African debt to China is $145 billion or so. Over $8 billion of payments is required this year, so that needs to be looked at, Ghana Finance Minister. He also said China must do more to help to ease the debt burden of African countries facing economic calamity as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. I've previously cited Bole and Addis Ababa as the epicenter of the coronavirus risk in Africa. Ethiopian Airlines CEO says 3 cabin crew members of Fly Ethiopian have tested positive for COVID-19. That's an iceberg. By default, Africa's heading for herd immunity. Africa_solar, he's right. We are looking into the rear view mirror when we look at our numbers, and we're seeing increasingly big cluster bursts, which are indicating our numbers are just nonsensical. For example, we are concerned about developments at St. Augustine's Hospital. 66 tested positive over the past few days. About 48 of them are staff. In nearly every country in the world, when the virus reaches 100 people, the number of cases begins to increase by 35% daily. At that rate, a country, just take the continent of Africa, which is at more than 10,000 cases, would reach 1 million cases just 31 days after reaching 100 cases. I have previously said, now everybody's catching up, but I said sub-Saharan Africa will contract in 2020, that's a certainty. I said we're staring into the abyss of a zombie apocalypse, that's another certainty. African economies face GFC-like conditions, interesting graphic from Reuters GMF. China must do more to help ease the debt burden of African countries. 2nd of March, when I touched on this, I said, the first issue is whether coronavirus will infect the continent. That is now definitively answered. We know that the coronavirus is exponential, non-linear, and multiplicative. What exponential disease propagation looks like, nothing. Well, that phase is gone. Cluster, we're in that phase, and the boom is going to happen within weeks. I asked on the 22nd of March, how much do we need to haircut fully sub-Saharan African remittances, and clearly by quite a lot. I was predicting more than 25%. 9th of December, I said they're still popping quaaludes in Lusaka. The Zambian kwacha is down 35.32% year to date. South Africa, dollar versus rand 18.34, bit of a rebound. Now, it couldn't get worse than this. 8 suspected Ebola cases admitted to hospital in Kampala. If lab confirmed, it may mean the virus has crossed the border from DR Congo and 200 miles to Uganda's capital city. Kenya, this was the front page of The Star today, and I think that essentially confirms the Gladwellian moment has arrived here in Kenya, when the virus reaches critical mass. When a random testing of a privileged class of few individuals gives you such a high percentage of positive coronavirus cases, then you get a rough idea of the size of the bomb you're sitting on, Ahmed Nasir. In Iran, it started like this. A huge number of politicians and government officials started testing positive. Then it later became obvious that there was a serious and exponential epidemic burning through the country. If we follow Kagwe's formula and listen to his daily ritual of the numbers that have tested positive, the process will continue up to the day of judgment. His process and procedures like the occurrence book in a police station that records incidents of crime in a given locality. Ahmed again. In the absence of a scientific model that underpins Kenya's anti-corruption strategy and anti-coronavirus strategy, Kagwe's daily dose of the number of Kenyans that tested positive is a useless ritualistic hyperbole. He's right. The cabinet secretary is saying the GDP will drastically drop to about 3% or even less, but we're going to give a firm figure maybe in the next month. Mr. Osoro, they are actually projecting growth, albeit at a declining rate, not a contraction. I see an actual contraction of 3% or even more. I know who I agree with. And with that, I shall take my leave. Thank you for listening.